Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. Buying my first house was one of the proudest and most exciting moments of my life. After years of scrimping and saving, I could finally afford a down payment on a modest little bungalow just outside the city limits. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. The neighborhood was quiet, just how I liked it. My closest neighbor was an older lady who lived alone with her 3 cats. We'd exchange friendly waves as she puttered around her flower beds and I hauled groceries from my car. Beyond her house stood a vacant lot that sprawled over a couple acres. It had been empty for as long as I could remember. That all changed one sunny Saturday morning. I was sipping coffee on my front porch when a large moving truck lumbered down the street and halted beside the vacant lot. Curious, I wandered over to investigate. A tall, severe-looking woman with a short blonde bob emerged from a shiny new SUV. She wore dark sunglasses and an expression that said, "Don't mess with me." "Good morning," I called out cheerfully. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Sarah, your neighbor from just down the way." The woman looked me up and down with thinly veiled disdain. "Charmed," she said briskly before turning away to direct the movers. Not exactly friendly, but I brushed it off. Moving is stressful after all. I'd try again later once she was settled in. Over the next few weeks, I saw little of my new neighbor. Construction vehicles came and went, hammering and sawing well into the evening hours. She had hired a full crew to build her dream home at record speed. One morning, I strolled out to my car and stopped short. A tall wooden fence now cut diagonally across my driveway, blocking access to the street. It took me a minute to process what I was seeing. This had to be some kind of mistake. Fuming, I marched over to my neighbor's front door and rang the bell. She answered, impeccably dressed, even at 8 a.m. "Can I help you?" she asked coolly. I pointed in disbelief towards her fence. "Your fence is blocking my driveway. I can't even get my car out." She glanced over with disinterest. "Yes, well, that's where my property line ends. Your driveway shouldn't have been built over the line to begin with." My jaw dropped. "This is my driveway on my property. That fence needs to go," she sniffed. "I had a survey done and have documentation that clearly shows where my land begins. Your little driveway trespasses over my property. I'm well within my rights to fence my property however I'd like." I struggled to contain my anger. "Listen, I don't know what shoddy survey you had done, but my house has been here for 15 years. That is my driveway on my land. I'm calling the police if you don't move your fence immediately." She waved a hand dismissively. "Go right ahead. The law is on my side." And with that, she shut the door in my face. Livid, I whipped out my cell phone and called the police non-emergency line. I paced impatiently until a patrol car finally rolled up 20 minutes later. The young policewoman stepped out and surveyed the situation. After listening politely to both sides, she delivered the bad news. This was a civil matter, so there was nothing she could do. Since my neighbor had documentation, it would have to be sorted out in court if we couldn't come to an agreement. The documentation was clearly incorrect, but I had nothing besides my word to prove it. And Karen, as I now thought of her, knew it. She stood there gloating, secure in her lies. Over the next week, I anxiously waited to hear from the city planning office about permit records for my driveway. Karen's fence remained stubbornly in place the whole time, forcing me to park on the street and squeeze my car past it. Finally, the records arrived in my email inbox. I eagerly scrolled through page after page until I found it. My original permit application from 15 years prior, clearly delineating the boundaries of my driveway. It was fully on my property, just as I knew it was. Clutching the papers triumphantly, I hurried next door and rang Karen's bell. I relished the look of surprise, then dawning unease on her face when she saw what was in my hands. "It seems you had some inaccurate information," I said, unable to keep the smugness out of my tone. "The city permit records clearly show you obstructed my legally approved driveway." Karen scowled. "Well, my surveyor will certainly want to take a look at those. There must be some mistake." "Oh, I'm quite sure your surveyor made multiple mistakes if he told you this was your land," I replied. "Now you can deal with the fence yourself, or I will file an official complaint and then legally pursue damages for blocking my driveway." I could almost see the wheels turning in Karen's head as she weighed her options. With an irritated huff, she finally said, "Fine, I will move the fence to its correct position." She turned on her heel and marched inside without another word. Within 2 days, a construction crew arrived and tore down the misplaced sections of fence. My driveway was finally clear again. Karen avoided eye contact as she came outside to oversee the work being done. I simply sat on my porch and watched, offering an occasional cheerful wave in her direction. In the weeks that followed, I considered how to best protect myself should any future property disputes arise with Karen. A lawyer friend helped me file paperwork to establish my property boundaries on record down at City Hall. I also posted no trespassing signs facing Karen's home and installed video cameras looking out over my driveway and yard, just for a little extra security and peace of mind. After learning her lesson the hard way, it seemed Karen was going to be a more cooperative, considerate neighbor from then on. But I wasn't taking any chances. This was my home, my land, and my sanctuary. Now properly documented and protected, I could finally relax and enjoy it without having to constantly watch my back. Justice had been served. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Background. The subject of this story is my mother. For the sake of this story, I'll call her Amber. She's in her late 70s and works for a women's clothing store that caters specifically to older clientele. She's been working for this particular company for around 20 years now. The manager of the store is the absolute epitome of a Karen, so let's call her Karen. She's extremely entitled, has short hair, is chubby, cheats on her husband, and is a blatant backstabber. Because the store is staffed mostly by older women, cliques tend to form. It's basically high school. Yes, older women can be that petty. And naturally, Karen has her own cronies. During periods when no one is in the store, there also tends to be a ton of gossip, important for later. The assistant manager, let's call her Jackie, is also one of Karen's lackeys, and she has her head way up Karen's ass. If Karen does something, then Jackie isn't far behind, etc. Amber is a bit of a ball buster, and she has zero tolerance for garbage in her personal life. Over the years, she has tried to stay impartial when it comes to her work. However, because to her it's all about professionalism. She also has empathy, which is something that seems to be in short supply with these other women. It also helps that she has been the top seller for her district for some 10 years running, despite working part-time. Karen and Jackie absolutely hate her for it, so much so that Karen routinely schedules her for hours that are not especially good. Despite this, though, Amber still has her loyal clientele, and she always comes out on top against the other sales associates in total sales almost every quarter. As expected, this naturally feeds the horrible feedback loop with Karen and Jackie. When COVID hit, the company decided to cut all commissions for sales associates. The commission was one of the main reasons why Amber endured Karen and Jackie's bullcrap. While she only made slightly above the state's minimum wage, with the commission, she could double or even triple that amount on good days. According to her, no other retailer in the area offers this kind of system, and it's pretty unlikely that the company will reinstate it even after COVID ends. Along with the cut in wages, the store was also forced to decrease the number of hours that they could offer to their associates. Karen took this as a way to essentially bar Amber from working at the store. While other associates were getting 8-10 hours a week, Amber would see maybe 6 if she was lucky, and they would be during times of low customer traffic. Karen could get away with this because the district manager is also in her pocket. Along with the reduced hours and the removal of commissions, the store naturally had a mandatory mask policy for all employees and customers. Karen and her lackeys would often idiot and moan about how unnecessary this was because, according to them, COVID is a hoax, and wearing masks makes you subservient to the government. There were a few incidents where Karen would let people without masks into the store, despite the state and company mandates. Amber refused to rock the boat, however, so when this would happen, she would go into the back of the store and stay as far away from these people as possible. During this period in time, a friend of the family and good friend of Amber's passed away due to complications from COVID. The funeral was set for a time when Amber was scheduled to work, so she called out that day. Karen and Jackie attacked Amber and the deceased, claiming that she must have caught the flu or been in bad health, and that Amber was feeding into the lie. Oh, how nice it must be to live such a privileged life. Not long after, a few of the store's loyal clients also passed away from COVID. And still Karen and Jackie, along with their groupies, maintain their narrative in the most vindictive way possible. Every time someone died, it must have been because of bad life choices or bad health. Never was it attributed to the global pandemic that was claiming thousands of lives a day, according to Karen and her groupies. And always, when Amber decided to go to the services or support the deceased in any way, she would hear snide remarks regarding how she was supporting a hoax. I guess sympathy is not really a thing for these people. Some of these customers were regulars who had been coming to that particular store for years, and still, none of the groupies would relent on these points. Recently, the COVID restrictions have started to lift, and many of the clientele and employees have gotten their vaccines. This includes submitting paperwork to show that you have indeed obtained a vaccine, or a note from a doctor explaining why you couldn't have one. Not Karen nor Jackie, though. To them, getting the vaccine would be like pumping poison into their veins. Instead, they decided to use fake COVID white cards with their information, effectively forging the documents. Amber, however, has suggested multiple times that they just get the vaccines because it is something that is mandated by the company. All employees must get vaccines when they are available, and given that almost all of the employees are above the age of 60, they have been eligible for the shots for months now. Recently, Amber had an emotional conversation directly with Karen where she expressed her concern for her. "I just want you and your family to be safe, so please get the vaccine." Karen responded with her normal snide attitude, of course. A few days later, however, Karen sent a text message mentioning that she had finally gotten the vaccine. She didn't. Amber replied that it was great and that she was happy for her. Karen just replied with a gif of some guy throwing up the middle finger. This was the beginning of the end for Amber. The incident. During one of her shifts, Amber overheard Karen and Jackie discussing how Amber was a moron and a sheep who bought the story about how Karen had taken the vaccine. During that same shift, Amber was working with a customer in the back, and some woman came into the store and stole a couple of items of clothing, probably totaling out to be $100 at most. Now it's company policy that during all shifts, there always be at least 2 employees in the store, and during this particular stretch of time, Jackie was the only other person in the store. According to the video cameras, Jackie was up in the front of the store playing with her phone when this woman came in. Normally, if someone steals items from the store, the protocol is to avoid confronting them and instead just call security after they've left the store. This is mainly to avoid lawsuits and to protect the employees should these people choose to get violent. It has happened in the past. That evening, Amber received a call from Karen telling her that she was on probation pending an investigation for allowing this woman to steal from the store. Given the company's policy regarding theft, this really made no sense. It was at this point that Amber truly decided she had had enough. Eventually, this probation led to Amber's dismissal, and the official reasoning was fairly vague. The revenge. One thing that I forgot to mention a few years ago, Amber asked me to teach her how to record things on her phone, and luckily we live in a single consent state. As such, Amber had recordings of these women backstabbing her and gossiping about rather scandalous things dating back for years. She had gathered quite the collection because you never know when you need to cover your own butt. Over the years, Amber has gone to HR to no real avail, even with her recordings. Whether it be because they are also in the pocket of Karen or that they just don't care remains to be seen. The HR department works directly under the district manager. Amber is also very good at keeping any paperwork and proof of these visits, including some recordings. She also recorded the call where she was fired. Amber has a ton of very loyal clients who were pretty distraught when they learned of her dismissal. One client in particular runs a column at one of the major newspapers for the nearby city. We will call her Casey. Since Amber was a part-time worker, she didn't really have much of a leg to stand on legally when it came to claiming a wrongful dismissal claim by legal means. However, that didn't mean that she didn't have any kind of recourse. She decided to attack the problem from multiple fronts. Amber compiled some of the greatest hits from her recording collection and had me email them to the corporate offices of the company, specifically the CEO, CTO, and basically every member of the board of directors. I emailed a couple of bursts to anyone who had any power that I could find. Along with those recordings, she wrote an email about how Karen, Jackie, and their group of sheep all refused to get vaccines and had falsified their vaccine documents to pass the company's standards. Casey then put Amber in touch with a columnist for the newspaper, and they got copies of the recordings, the text messages, and the dismissal phone call. They also did an interview which was for an article and a TV slot on the local news. Amber discussed the commission cuts, clear favoritism, lack of any intervention by HR, forged documents, company policy, the incident, etc. Basically anything relevant to paint these women in a terrible light. Among some of these recordings were bits of gossip that included conversations regarding Karen's various boyfriends over the years. She was married. And Amber also wrote an anonymous email to the husband that included some of these recordings. The fallout. Things escalated pretty quickly, as you can probably imagine. Karen, Jackie, the district manager, and a couple of the groupies were immediately fired and put under investigation for forging documents. While forging a vaccine card isn't really something too serious, it could lead to some pretty hefty fines. There is no specific law against forging the vaccine white cards. However, because the white cards contain the government seal, well, you can just imagine how illegal that might be. Let's just say the FBI has stepped in on this one. One of the recordings featured Karen admitting to using forged cards. After the article and TV slot ran on the local news, the CEO reached out to Amber to formally apologize for the behavior of HR, the district manager, Karen, and Jackie. She even went so far as to offer Amber a raise, but Amber declined because she found a job that actually paid a fair wage and let her work on her own time. The real problem for the CEO and the board was the fact that their employees were breaking the company policy for a store that exclusively catered to older women regarding a virus that tends to kill older people. They faced heavy public backlash for this. Karen's husband seems to have separated from her after finding out about her infidelity. Whether or not this will lead to a divorce remains to be seen. The best part for Amber is that many of her clients started coming to her new store, and again, she's excelling as one of the best sales associates. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened roughly 20 years ago, and my brother, this is his and my favorite subreddit, told me that this story belonged here, as I had never told anyone this until recently. When I was 18, I worked part-time at a low-end car dealership as the front desk receptionist. So we got a lot of colorful customers and unfortunately the occasional Karen complaining and raising hell about something ridiculous. Lucky for me, I was always the first person they came into contact with, so I would sometimes get an earful over something I had nothing to do with. Well, this particular woman, let's call her Betty, was a real peach. She was just incredibly entitled, angry, and demanding, the drop everything for me type of customer. Well, Betty came into the dealership one evening. I worked the afternoon, early evening shift. I was reading a magazine and put it down as she was walking in to greet her. This was her 4th or 5th appearance, and I knew things were going to go south. Well, in typical Karen fashion, she asked to see the manager. I honestly do not remember what she was so over-the-top angry about, as I tuned her out and went back to reading my magazine. She was the only customer in the building at the time. It all happened so fast, but I heard her stomping in my direction as she was leaving, and before I knew it, she fully snatched my magazine right out of my hands. Like a sad little kid who just had their toy taken away, I went, "Hey, that's mine! Give it back!" She then proceeded to say, "No, I will not give it back. Ask your manager to buy you a new one." I then asked her again to please give it back, and she shouted, "No, it's mine now!" What the actual hell, lady? Never had I been treated in such a way. My manager told me how sorry he was and that he would get me another magazine. I told him that wouldn't be necessary. Now I was a straight-up goody-goody when I was a kid-teen, pretty much my whole life. I never did anything remotely bad for fear of getting into trouble, but Betty ignited something in me. When I got off work, I went to my local grocery store, headed straight for the magazine aisle, and spent just over an hour opening each one and taking out the removable cards you fill out to subscribe to said magazine. Once done, I brought them all home. I'm guessing I had close to 100 of them. Since I had access to the dealership's customer database, I had Betty's home address and phone number, which I made note of before going to the store. I spent another hour or two filling out each card with her name and address and made sure to check the Bill Me Later box for a 12-month subscription on each. I got multiple magazines for every category you can think of. fashion, pop culture, outdoors, LGBTQ, crafting, fitness, cooking, sports, guns and ammo, African American, Latino American, teeny bopper, traveling, auto racing, you name it, I got it. The next day I dropped them all in one of those community USPS collection drop boxes that was on my way to work. Still to this day, I wonder what happened, as we never saw Betty after that. I was just hopeful that Betty got all the magazines she truly deserved. The next one is a malicious compliance story. When I was in college almost 20 years ago, I had a summer job working for a small builder. We were building a good-sized deck and installing some large boulders around it as landscaping. The guy operating the equipment used to move the boulders accidentally backed it into the side of the house. A window and part of the wall were destroyed. The corner of the equipment was about a foot inside the living room. The guy we were working for explained everything to the homeowner and promised it would be fixed as soon as possible. He even put it in writing at the homeowner's request. The homeowner was upset but seemed pretty reasonable and understanding. We were there until almost 10 p.m. that night, building a temporary wall and covering it with plywood. The owner and one other guy went back the next day to make it look a little nicer. The plan was to order the window and siding and come back to do everything right once we had the supplies. The cost to repair the house was much more than we were paid for the entire deck and landscaping job. The thing is, the homeowner had paid in full with a credit card at the start of the job. He decided to do a chargeback, saying no goods or services were provided. The boss was pissed. He had agreed to every extra thing the homeowner had asked for. Replacing another unbroken window so they would match, replacing the carpet in the entire room even though it wasn't really damaged, repainting the entire room, a hallway, and 2 other rooms that were the same color so they would match, and a few other things. The next time the homeowner called him for an update, the boss told him that he had received the chargeback, stating that no goods or services were provided by him, so it must have been some other company that did the work. He told them to call the other company and stopped answering the homeowner's phone calls. I like to imagine his malicious compliance worked and it just ended there. That he got away with only the money lost from the chargeback and not the cost of fixing the house. I don't know how it ended. Summer was over and I went back to school. I'm sure he fixed the house eventually. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.